George Michael is one of the biggest pop stars in the world, worth an estimated $90 million. We've been looking at his face since he was a teenager in the 1980s. From boy band heartthrob to gay icon, his life and his image have transformed over the last 3 decades. We tell a story from his early childhood.
He was awkward and ugly and self-conscious. He had glasses, the hair was sort of mad and unruly and rather Greek, and I think he felt out of place.
His transformation into 90s rock god.
He suddenly turned from this kind of ridiculous sort of bouffon, hot-panted, mad thing, and suddenly he became very cool.
And his troubled life as a gay superstar.
I am George Michael. I like beautiful people. I get to sleep with beautiful people, including my boyfriend.
We reveal the secrets of his famous face.
The white-faced people love a challenge, so George loves to take on something that's new and different, and he rises to the occasion.
Meet the London tailor who created his suits.
Sometimes he wouldn't wear anything underneath a suit. It would just be like a pair of braces.
And shed light on his iconic shades.
The whole look that he had was with ripped jeans and sort of white t-shirt and beautiful caramel skin, and then with the sort of sunglasses to kind of top them off, became an actual kind of iconic image in itself.
From pop wannabe to celebrity icon, this is the changing face of George Michael. George Michael was born Georgios Panayiotou in London in 1963 to an English mother and a Greek Cypriot father.
He was the youngest of 3 children, I think a very caring and loving mother, and a largely absentee father. His father worked in the restaurant business, wasn't there. He probably didn't have a very close relationship with his dad when he was younger, mostly because his father was off earning the family crust.
I think the Greek Cypriot thing, being a very family thing, is a huge sort of part of George's makeup, and I think his relationship with his mother was very important.
Life at home was happy and loving, but young Georgios was geeky looking and shy.
He was awkward and ugly and self-conscious. He had glasses, the hair was sort of mad and unruly and rather Greek, and I think he felt out of place. I think as a young man and as a child, he lacked confidence.
George's life changed forever when he went to secondary school and met a certain Andrew Ridgeley.
Andrew's real ambition when we met was to be either a footballer or a pop star. He knew he didn't want to go to university. Even though I had a very strong will, I also knew that basically I was going to get thrown out of my very comfortable position at home if I didn't stick to the studying, and if I didn't at least pretend that I wanted to get some A-levels.
George did pretty well at school, and he could have gone on to university, and I suspect his parents were rather disappointed that he didn't go on to university, that Andrew started to kind of lead him astray a bit earlier.
My mum and dad didn't like Andrew very much, you see, because, you know, it's the typical story, you know, when you get to about 12 or 13 at school and you suddenly realise that there are better things to do than homework or whatever.
But I suspect his parents were always rather disappointed that George didn't go on and follow, you know, a professional life that they didn't have, probably law, I should think.
George did finish college, but Andrew's influence had already begun to change him, and he never looked back.
He sat next to Andrew in class and sort of fallen in love with him. I don't mean sexually now, just in love with his look. Andrew was the lad about the classroom. So George copied him. He straightened his hair and put in contact lenses and lost weight. And he became fantastic looking, as good looking as Andrew.
I think Andrew Ridgeley gave George a confidence. It allowed him to hide behind somebody else who was very confident, very cocky, very sure of himself. And George was insecure, but felt that he had some kind of burgeoning talent, even though it might have been embryonic at that point, with his love of music.
When I was about 14 years old, I remember I was washing up in my father's restaurant and I was listening to something. It was on a tape machine in the restaurant itself. And it occurred to me that some melody shouldn't have gone that way, it should have gone another way. And it suddenly occurred to me that I would have written it that other way. That was the first moment that I ever remember thinking I could write that, but better.
Once George showed that he had a bit of a musical talent, Andrew, wouldn't let that go and wanted to make play of that, and could see that that was a chance for him to move in a direction that he'd have liked, which was the attention and the fame and so on.
It was a winning formula. Andrew had the confidence and George had the musical talent, and with the pop scene buzzing, the timing was right too.
What was happening when George Michael and Andrew Ridgeley were teenagers was the most exciting time for British music ever, in that things were shifting constantly every 6 months. So George Michael and Andrew Ridgeley knew about the alternative scene. George Michael's favourite group when he was growing up was Joy Division, but more importantly they also knew about black music. But he and Andrew Ridgeley were essentially white sock wearing soul boys who understood the power of the great Motown song.
But George's dream of pop success didn't go down well with his dad.
I spent my whole childhood having rows with my father because he's not very musical, to put it mildly, and I don't suppose I can't blame him. I mean, he had no idea about what possibilities there were for me, and he just looked at it as a very, very dodgy profession to want to go into.
The boys quickly got a record contract. Georgios was now half of a pop duo, and when he changed his Greek-sounding name, the transformation was complete, and George Michael was born.
First of all, I think he lost the glasses, the hair which has kind of dogged him all his life. He tried to attend to, he cut it shorter. In fact, he would spend quite a lot of time, one way and another, being preoccupied with his hair over the ensuing years.
Well, he definitely reached a bond because he has very dark hair. You remember, he's Greek, and he had, the whole Greek coloring, dark skin, olive skin, dark hair. And he was a rock star. A lot of rock stars bleach their hair and try different things.
But what was it about George's face that meant he had what it took to become a star? Naomi Tickle has studied thousands of faces and believes she can tell what George's face has to say about him.
The eyebrows, you see how they go up like this. So the more eyebrows go up, they're very creative artists, musicians. He really likes that stage. But he's also, if you look at the inverted V of his eyebrow, it's to do with design. And then it comes down at the end a little bit, which is to do with organization. So he needs somewhere where he has an outlet for his creativeness. The eyes, see how magnetic they are? Very warm, very emotional, very personable. He'll want open places, open spaces. He'll also enjoy the water. So he needs the water and the outdoors. The more angle the chin, the more stubborn people are. It comes down here, and then you'd see it comes like this, across like that. So if you try to tell them what to do, they think, I wish they wouldn't do that to me. The lips more protruding, so he would tend to be more impulsive. He's fairly positive. The outer corner of the lips are just up a little bit. And he has a fairly large lips. He's very generous by nature, very giving.
Everybody loved Wham, because Wham was self-effacing, Wham were young. It was Jackson 5, but it was also British and it had a sense of humour.
Andrew and George, you know, bouncing around in their shorts with practically shuttlecocks down the front, you know, sort of, they kind of epitomised the 80s.
They were basically gym shorts, and he was experimenting. I think he wanted to be provocative because they were pretty short, and I think he wanted to experiment in a new look, and that was important to him. And it was a silly look, but it was fine. It was right for the time.
It was outrageously casual and teenagey, and it was different from everything else that was going on. They did actually live all the time in discos. I mean, they were projecting a young people who lived a disco life.
It was all kind of very easy pop, wasn't it? It was very fun. Looking back, I mean, what dorks they looked.
Wham's success grabbed the attention of top music manager Simon Napier Bell, who wanted them to hit the big time.
Simon Napier Bell had already established himself in the music industry and was a man with great confidence who had a publicist's eye, and so he felt that Wham was just what Wham needed.
They projected an image which was this extraordinary male camaraderie. It's the image which you got in Butch Cassidy, the Sundance Kid and things like that. You just knew at once this was a fantastic imagery to work with. And besides that, the music was wonderful, and I knew that it was all self-written, so it just seemed like here was you just take this, and all you've got to do is give it a good framework and sell it to the world.
Dave Hogan knows a lot about catching the rich and famous on camera. Since the early 80s, he's been snapping them for the British tabloids, but even he was surprised by some of the early shots he got of Wham.
The first time I met George Michael was, you know, they were young pop stars. I think one of their first concerts was at the Hammersmith Odeon, and I was asked to go down there and do some pictures. There was no crowd there waiting for them, you know, there was no hysteria, so we had to actually hang around the back so that some fans would turn up to look like they were the most popular band around at the time. He lost his voice on one of these concerts and had to cancel. And rather than just cancel, put it on notice, I got invited down to his house to actually explain to, you know, the Sun readers and the paper that I worked for at the time why he was cancelling and, you know, how much he wanted to say sorry to his fans. So I turned up and he's in his dressing gown, knobbly knees and sprouting hair everywhere, and all his little cuddly toys and his cats. And I sort of went, oh, I'll do some pictures of that. To this day now, he still can't believe he allowed a photographer into his house, no makeup, no PRs, none of it. He was just grateful, I think, somebody had turned up.
I mean, everybody had money in the 80s, you know, it was a great time. George Michael and Wham kind of personified that mentality and that idea.
All those other groups which were around in the 80s, Human League and Spandau Ballet and those people, there was all of them a slightly political aspect. They were always a little bit left-wing, they were always against the, you know, the affluent society. And George and Andrew embraced it. I mean, they were called Thatcherite children, but they didn't complain, they didn't have a political agenda. They just said, time's come to go out and have fun.
It's Andrew Ridgeley's aesthetic that made Wham so successful, because Andrew Ridgeley, with his tongue firmly in his cheek, totally understood what pop music was.
We thought we'd make pop records with a little bit of black influence and throw in some humorous lyrics, but unfortunately the humorous lyrics were taken by a lot of people very seriously and kind of shook up our own vision of what we were supposed to be doing.
By 1983, Wham were riding high in the charts, but their bank balances were in the doldrums.
There was a rather hand-to-mouth existence going on, where they were waiting for the first royalties to come through. The fact that those royalties, when they did come, were rather minor, didn't really help the situation.
Ridgely said to George Michael, you know, this record deal is terrible when it comes to singles. We don't make any money out of singles, but pop videos, you see all the money they're spending on the pop videos, that comes out of our royalties. Let's write a song about going on holiday. Call it Club Tropicana, I'm off down the pub.
The assumption that they had made it in the music business and it was all wine and roses and champagne and tons of money coming in was never quite the case. When they appeared, their first appearance on Top of the Pops, they were in a crappy little hotel in Charing Cross. They weren't at the Dorchester and quaffing fine champagne. It didn't go that way.
George was only 21 when Wham hit the top 10 and their unique dress sense hit the high street.
It was so successful, those great big t-shirts with words on them, that really brought George Michael and Wham into the public's eye. You know, can't believe that a t-shirt elevated them into the public's eye, but you never know what's going to do it.
With hordes of screaming female fans and a sexy macho image, no one ever thought about George's sexuality.
No one thought of George as gay then, and I didn't know he was, and I wasn't interested. You know, just wasn't the subject which came up. But now when you look back at the early videos, you look and think, gosh, he looks very gay.
I think we were more innocent in those days, and also you were being sold a package. You're being sold with everything that they do and every bit of PR that they do. You're being sold a heterosexual package. Perhaps package is the wrong word, sorry.
When I first saw Wham, I was convinced that Andrew Ridgeley was gay. The idea that George Michael was gay, I didn't think about. And of course, hilariously, that's so not true, you know. Subsequently realised that was obviously part of why George had him in the band. You know, he just fancied the pants off him, you know. Although you could never get those pants off him because they were solidly glued onto their bodies. They were so tight.
Wham had wowed the UK, but they had even bigger ambitions. Now they wanted to wow the world.
I mean, they were pretty arrogant and pretty ruthless. They knew what they wanted. They said, we want to be the biggest group in the world, and you can have a year. And by the way, we don't want to do any photographs and any interviews. Well, I mean, it's madness. And so we drank a lot of wine, and after about 7 or 8 bottles, said, well, maybe make you the first group to play in Communist China. And George said, that's a good one, fix that.
It took Simon Napier Belmont's to plan and cost the band nearly £500,000, but in April 1985, Wham became the first pop group to play Communist China. George had gone global.
This was purely a stunt. This was take any band to the Great Wall of China, and overnight they will be household names, and that's what happened. Overnight, in America, as much as in Australia and Timbuktu, everybody knew who Wham was.
We want to be in the front pages of all the American newspapers and then ABC, NBC, CBS News 5 times a day for a week. We want all the press to come in and push the news outwards. And it was a deal we made, a deal with the devil.
The concerts that ensued in China were actually dismal affairs that probably contributed quite early on to George Michael rather hating touring. The front rows were full of dignitaries and I think the audience had been forbidden to stand up and jig to the music.
Had over 500 journalists there, you know, the whole, when they walked around, there were 200 people with cameras behind. It was a nightmare. And Andrew was the one who snapped. He really hated it. And every time he saw a camera guy, he'd go, like that. And George says, you're going to regret it. Of course, when he got, and George didn't, because he realised George is always the clever one, and George knew however much he hated it, give a nice picture. So when they got home, every picture of Andrew was horrible, and every picture of George was nice.
George was the clever one, and fed up being a pretty boy pin-up. He wanted to be taken seriously as a musician.
he was, you know, far more talented than Andrew. I mean, and certainly musically. There's great talent bursting inside him, and yet people judged him in a way by the way he looked.
George wanted to be a serious musician and taken seriously for his writing, and rather than this cartoon cutout of a pop star.
The unhappier George was as part of Wham, the more effort he put into writing music. The result? He became the youngest person to receive an Ivor Novello Award.
Elton John gave him the award at Grosvenor House Hotel and declared him to be the greatest talent of his generation, and compared him to Paul McCartney, which certainly is where he sits. He sits up there with McCartney and Lennon.
George was now a serious songwriter, and as far as Wham was concerned, his face didn't fit anymore.
The image of Wham is a fake image. And when George originally wrote all the songs which Wham did, he had written them for Andrew and somebody else, not for himself. He'd seen a concept of this, the image we know, but he thought someone else would come and do it, and they didn't find anyone else, and it ended up being George. So he felt a fake. The longer it went on, the more he felt very in a straitjacket and was very unhappy with it.
I suspect the penny dropped at some point that George thought, this has been fine and this has established me, but it's time to move on.
In February 1986, George and his lawyers announced that he was splitting from Simon Napier Bell. Days later, Andrew followed. Wham was over.
The statement came across as something about me leaving Andrew behind as opposed to the management behind, which was really not the case. I think it should be the most amicable split in pop history if we do it properly.
In July 1986 at Wembley Stadium, it was grown-up rock star George, wearing black denim and leather, who said goodbye to the Wham fans from behind his sunglasses.
No regrets about splitting up. So a huge thank you to everyone, not only today, but for the last 4 years.
Andrew, in a way, probably got the peace of mind out of that relationship, because he's the man who was able to go to Cornwall, not worry about fame, and just get on with a nice sort of family lifestyle. George, on the other hand, had the money and the pressure, and I suspect George would say that he actually got out of it exactly what he wanted.
Wham had bounced across the British pop scene for 4 years. They'd had 10 #1 singles, but George wanted something new, something he thought he could find in America. So he went to Los Angeles.
I suspect that when he got to LA, was probably the first time he'd stopped working for anything more than a couple of weeks at most. He actually found himself in one of those extended holidays. But I suspect also trying to work out what he wanted.
And what George wanted was to put the Wham days behind him and completely reinvent himself.
When he wanted to kill off the bubblegum pop image of the shiny-faced, well-tanned Whamite, he kind of went the other way, went so far the other way that it was almost, in itself a caricature.
And suddenly, it became very cool. The stubble, the hair stopped being boofy, he got very buff, and the suntan went down a notch, it went to kind of brown from orange. Suddenly it actually became this very cool guy.
Black leather jacket and black jeans and pointy American cowboy boots, and overnight, of course, launched the look of the stubble. This is a man who helped sell more razors than anybody else in the 80s.
George had a new look and a new sound. Faith became the biggest album of 1987 on both sides of the Atlantic.
Faith sold 25 million in the space of a year, and it meant he outsold everybody else on CBS's roster that year. He was just the biggest artist of the year.
Mark Hayward's home is awash with pop memorabilia. As a collector, he's been on the George Michael trail since the early days of Wham.
Wham were an English thing. They were hopeless for any other country. It was English, only the English got it. No one else would get it. George was wanting to break into America, and he did so spectacularly with that album, Faith. It was a monster hit. Well, this is George at the height of his career, I suppose, for want of a better word, a bit of stubble. I mean, no one had really used the word designer stubble because you either had a beard or you didn't. He was sort of halfway house. So that was his thing. And also the earring was a sort of a very gay thing, wasn't it? I think if you wore the earring on that ear, it meant you are gay, or I'm not quite sure what the setup was. Anyway, he looks very dapper there, and the girls love it. That's what they want. They said, I love him, lovely, and he can sing, and he earns a lot of money. I'll have him. That's the most ironic thing, though, in a sort of funny way. I mean, everyone in the world, you know, from Holland to America, they were all thinking, oh, I would love to jump into bed with George Michael, and things changed.
Designer stubble proved a big financial hit for George too. He took the rough and ready look on tour, and the money came rolling in.
I remember one funny time I actually went into Barclays Bank in Soho Square. These guys came in with massive sacks of cash, tons of it, all in black bin liners. And they had to come around the side and hand it over. And I said, what's that all about? He said that was the merchandise sold from the recent George Michael concert. You know, it's tons. I mean, so this man has suddenly become very, very marketable, you know, big time.
In 1988, George went on tour with his new look. Every George Michael fan in America got the chance to see him up close.
The record company, unsurprisingly, liked Faith, because Faith came out, and at the same time George is touring. He's got, I think, an 18-month tour around America, and every concert helps fuel further sales of Faith. He was huge, and so if you're a record company and you see the money coming in, no wonder you like him.
The record company were happy, but George was struggling with the demands of superstardom.
I wanted to be a star, and I wanted people to love me and recognise me in the street. As a child, that was what I wanted, but I never really wanted to be someone else. And I think the people that are the most vivid and colourful, fascinating stars are always people who basically want to be someone else. I believe that of Madonna. I believe that of Prince. I believe that of Michael Jackson. I'm not saying this is a terrible flaw, and it actually makes them very, very interesting people, but I just didn't see myself as someone living 24 hours a day as a star.
George Michael was just 25 years old and a huge star, but never one to shy away from controversy. He was about to negotiate a new relationship with his fans.
George Michael, as an intelligent man, was always somebody who was very keen, not just to manage his own media, but to keep an element of the enigma about him.
Celebrity snapper Dave Hogan captured George's new public image on film.
I remember sort of photographing him as he was coming out of the club, and he said, that's it, I don't want to do this anymore. He sort of would start retreating behind the dark sunglasses, and also putting photographers further away. You know, don't let them too close, don't let them in to see what's going on within his eyes. When you photograph people and they never take their sunglasses off, you never get close. It is that glass that they live behind, and it becomes quite boring to photograph because there's very little feeling in the pictures.
George Michael's famous face is always framed by frames. Hiding behind eyewear has become his trademark. Freya Huntley knows a thing or two about glasses. She casts her expert eye over the shades that have become such a big part of his public image.
first sunglasses that became synonymous with George Michael were Wayfarers in Wham. So classic Wayfarer, the Wayfarer original, still the most popular frame today. Also, he's famous for wearing the Ray-Ban Aviator. Aviators became famous in the film Top Gun, with Tom Cruise wearing the aviators, and they were originally made for the army. They were G15 lens, which was a lens specifically designed for fighter pilots because it neutralises the light. But the aviator, hence its name, that George Michael, well, he sort of made popular the very mirrored aviators and the specialised tint going down from sort of a dark tint to a light tint. Mirrored aviators might be good because you can't see any of your eye behind them, and also look quite blingy. You know, they're quite sort of sparkly, and you can get gold mirrored and silver mirrors as well. He kind of made that look cool, and the whole look that he had was with ripped jeans and sort of white t-shirt and beautiful caramel skin, and then with the sort of sunglasses to kind of top them off, became an actual kind of iconic image in itself.
George was hot property, but he wanted his private life private, refusing to use his face to promote his latest album.
Listen Without Prejudice, idea of, okay, I've had images in the past, I don't want to have an image anymore. Let's not have an image, let's be completely quiet and put a paper bag over my head, totally backfired because it made him look pompous. And in Britain, especially, he got a right kicking for that because we don't like our pop stars to be pompous.
The record company were upset with George for Listen Without Prejudice for a couple of reasons. One was that he wouldn't have his image on the cover. The other one was that he said he wasn't prepared to tour to promote that album in any way. And so this man who went from selling 25 million to, I think, maybe 7 or 8 million tops for that album at the time.
George's heterosexual heartthrob image was becoming increasingly difficult to square with the reality of his life. In 1990, he met a young Brazilian man. George was in love, but still not out of the closet.
Now, he's always said that it was to do with the relationship with his parents and coming from a really quite conservative Greek background and so on and so forth. Actually, that rings absolutely true to me. You know, it doesn't matter how many people are out there in the pop industry, if you don't feel in your heart that you're able to do it, then you won't.
The really sad gay person, he can't accept in himself that he is. He doesn't know that he is. He's pretending that they're not. That wasn't George. George knew what he was. And then there's a level where you come out with all your friends and everybody knows, but you prefer not to tell the press. Or you tell the bigger circle, but you still don't tell the general public. So George went through that transition.
When AIDS started taking lives in the 1990s, George's sexuality was not common knowledge. But he was one of the first celebrities to give his time and image to the campaign.
Margaret Thatcher and the cynics in her government tried to portray AIDS as being a gay plague that only gay people got, and that in a way this was a lesser part of society that didn't need compassion or help. And so the politic behind this was that most rock performers or musicians with an ounce of decency about them realised that we had to help anybody who had AIDS. You were losing people left, right and centre. And it went on for about 18 months, 2.5 years, that sense of loss that you would discover.
In 1993, after only a few very happy years together, George's boyfriend Anselmo was diagnosed with AIDS and died. George was devastated.
You know, his great boyfriend, who's called Anselmo, as I remember, he died, and I think that probably made a huge emotional shift for George. And then I guess he made some personal decisions.
From that time on, there was a poignant new element to George's look, a red ribbon pinned to his lapel.
The red ribbon is a symbol, it's an absolute symbol of solidarity and standing alongside people who are at the forefront of the fight against HIV. Just the simple act of wearing that ribbon when you're out and about means, actually, I don't subscribe to the prejudice and the stigma. I'm there. I support.
It became, for a while, a sort of show business uniform. Not, by the way, to doubt the sincerity of the people who wore it, but there was a stage at which, if you didn't wear it at the Oscars, you kind of were making a statement about something, you know. And bear in mind, at the point at which it became an accessory, actually governments in America and other countries still weren't doing enough. They still had an epidemic on their hands and they weren't responding properly. So it's still a brave gesture.
Every time George Michael wears his red ribbon, it says something. It makes a small but really important statement. And that means I'm not, having it with this prejudice and stigma around a virus that is affecting people's lives. It's enormously important, actually. You can't overestimate the significance of that little red ribbon.
And George was about to take a stand for something else he believed in, his creative freedom and independence.
George Michael is a man of steely determination, and what always appealed to me when I wanted to do the book was, here is a businessman. Through and through, this man is a businessman. He also happens to be a great songwriter. The combination of the two together is unique.
In 1993, George decided to face up to his difficulties with his record label and take legal action against them. The news cameras outside the High Court in London caught a smarter, more formal-looking George on camera.
George fell out with Sony because they didn't like the way he operated. They didn't like that he wouldn't tour in order to promote album releases. Conversely, the person who was running Sony at the time, George interpreted as being homophobic.
Well, the head of the company calls him a limey faggot. I think calling somebody a limey faggot is a grounds for the artist getting out of the contract. Well, of course, lawyers wouldn't think like that. It would set new ground. It would be an unprecedented case. And they said, oh, in that case, we go for the contract, we'll find things which are wrong. And there weren't really things wrong. I don't think he was wrong to get into the case, but I think it was fought on the wrong basis. And in the end, it was just a nuisance for him and held his career up.
He actually was prepared to lose everything by fighting Sony to say, I don't like the way you treat me and I don't want to be tied to you forever. And that's a very bold step. And it takes a man of great confidence, I think, to be able to be prepared to gamble his entire career on a legal battle that actually he wasn't going to win.
The court ruled that George's contract with Sony was lawful, but behind the scenes a deal was struck which gave him what he wanted.
I think it took its toll on him a bit. It was a dramatic thing to have entered into, and it must have left scars at the time. But he is a man who's not going to be messed around in that way.
The court case showed the public a smarter, more serious George than they were used to.
He was businesslike, and he was approaching a very serious matter, a court case in the High Courts of London, in a very serious manner. This was not, he didn't want to turn up in a fancy, blouse. This was a man who was playing the part of being a serious businessman, taking on a serious problem.
I think there comes a stage when everybody goes to the good suit, because it does look terrific. And you can hide a multitude of sins, not that he needs to, with a suit. It looks sharp, it looks bright, it looks intelligent. Leather jacket's fine, it has its place, but in a suit you somehow become something else, elegant.
London tailor Chris Rocco knows that the clothes make the man. He's been getting the measure of British pop stars since George's Wham days.
At that particular time, I was making for Spandau Ballet, Wham, and Madness. They queued up for the autographs here. There was a queue right around the corner, and I used to make them get in line, and then they used to sign on there. Well, Andrew was the instigator. He was the one that knew what they wanted. George wasn't really interested in clothes. And then most of the stuff that I used to make for Andrew, George used to wear. And also I used to make for the band as well. They had sometimes really exotic stuff that George didn't really like. His uncle was a tailor, and he used to make his suits, but George never liked him. Sometimes he wouldn't wear anything underneath a suit. It would just be like a pair of braces. He never really wore a lot of suits in those days, but now he does. I mean, you always see him in a suit now.
In 1997, with a court case behind him, George was dividing his time between London and his home in Los Angeles, when something happened which would put his face on the evening news around the world.
The arrest of George Michael in the toilets of a Los Angeles park surprised even his closest friends, and led many to wonder why the singer might allegedly risk so much for a brief sexual thrill.
It was like, oh, George Michael got into trouble in the loo with a man, is he gay? And it was kind of, it came out like that. So that was, you know, very jarring, I'm sure, for him.
George Michael's house in Beverly Hills, Los Angeles, has been surrounded for the past 36 hours by press and broadcasters eager to catch any glimpse of the singer. Where he is remains a mystery.
It must be the most dreadful thing in the world to have your sexuality made public. You know, it's the kind of last bastion of your privacy, surely.
This cottage pickup thing that happened was a big turnoff to Americans here. People were disappointed in him. And then also there's something remarkable when you have a major star, very wealthy, really handsome, great looking, trying to seek anonymous sex in a ridiculous place like the Beverly Hills, you know, public restroom.
Now George was forced to show his face. He knew that the damage to his valuable public image had been done. It was time to face the music and go on a PR offensive.
He just thought, I've got to find my way back into the hearts of people here. I've just got to explain to them, it was just a bit of meaningless sex. If a loo had nice wallpaper and a vase of flowers in the corner, would that make it better? The fact that there's a loo, does it really matter? You know, people have sex all over the place.
The way he came out strangely turned him into an underdog, and also being British, he understood how to take the mickey out of himself.
People expected this to be a really big hit on George Michael's image. He got away with it because he treated it with humour, and he's done that with most things throughout his life.
Now George was out and was photographed more and more with his handsome American boyfriend Kenny Goss by his side.
I photographed them a few times together. It wasn't so much that the picture was worth a lot, in a sense. It was just a statement that he was happy to be photographed with his partner.
He's a sweet guy, really smiley. You know, he has that Dallas, Texas kind of big personality, warm, funny. It's easy to see why George and he liked each other. I think they had very much an open relationship. In fact, George talked about that, you know, while they were a couple, they could sleep with other people. It wasn't a problem, and they weren't going to break up over that. It was just sex.
George's alfresco frolics might have been fine with Kenny, but the British tabloids were damning. And George was unrepentant.
I am George Michael. I like beautiful people. I get to sleep with beautiful people, including my boyfriend. I have a career that I love. I live in the most beautiful house I've ever seen. I have a wonderful partner of 10 years who not only gives me affection every day of my life, but also has no problem with me having extracurricular sex, as it were. I get to do that whenever I want.
The scandal of that almost seemed to unleash this inner rebel from George, and ever since that moment, I think he hasn't really looked back, and he's gone from one outrageous thing that he said or done to the next.
A seedy side of George was beginning to emerge. Revelations of his drug use hit the headlines, and then he drove what was left of his reputation into a brick wall, or rather, assaulted parked cars and buildings, landing him in court more than once.
It's very difficult to work out quite what's going on in George's mind when he gets behind the wheel under the influence of anything, and I suspect that's the one thing that he really ought to be regretting in life.
In 2011, George's days in the driving seat ended when he crashed his luxury Range Rover into a local photographic shop.
George Michael has no business behind the wheel of a car. I mean, I think that has been proven again and again. He's had several arrests for driving, using, being under the influence, and also kind of a bizarre incident where he drove his car into a Snappy Snaps photography studio.
This time, his celebrity status offered no protection. He was sentenced to 8 weeks in prison and banned from driving for 5 years. Now he was Jailbird George.
Most people in Britain weren't surprised it was just the latest in a line of escapades with George Michael in a car. Unfortunately, though, for him, this came at the end of being let off and being warned by the judges for his previous misdemeanors. Because of this, he was put in jail. Most people, I think that would have been a defining moment in their career. But I think George Michael has such a lot of affection, particularly in the minds of the people of Britain. Even when he went to jail, there was a lot of sympathy for him. And he himself acknowledged, which was a fantastic PR move, instead of fighting the case, he said that he hoped that it was going to give him the opportunity to change his life.
George's spell inside transformed him. Once he was released, he was determined to clean up his act and get back on the road.
In terms of trying to kind of stay on the straight and narrow, as it were, then there's nothing better than work that you love. And so I thought I should tour sooner rather than later.
So when George sort of came back and was doing his recent tour, he just looked like a much more mature, content man. Happy within his own skin.
An older and wiser George embarked on a tour of the opera houses of Europe. The Symphonica tour was his first for nearly 4 years. On the first night of the concert, an emotional George announced he had split from partner of 10 years, Kenny Goss. Weeks later, after a sellout concert, George fell ill. He was rushed to hospital with pneumonia and spent a nerve-wracking 2 weeks in intensive care.
Looking weak but feeling better, this is the first we've seen of George Michael for over a month, outside his North London home and with just a few emotional words.
I really, 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 from the bottom of my heart, thank everybody who sent messages and everybody in that ICU unit that made sure that I'm still here today. I really can't say any more because I'm trying to get over the tracheotomy.
When you watched him talking to the press outside his house when he got back, I thought he looked noticeably, he was really shaken. And, this had been a horrible, horrible experience. And you get the sense that, rather selfishly, I thought to myself, oh, that'll produce some interesting songs.
For the last 30 years, George Michael has been thrilling audiences. From his days as a young gun in Wham, to the leather-clad Faith years, to his current role as a suited and booted crooner.
He confuses people, which is good. There are stories of him crashing his car into Happy Snaps or being out in Hampstead Heath in the bushes, and then you see him as very sophisticated nitrous. It's great. People who get one image of what, say, a druggy person or a homosexual is, have it completely confused by the other image. I like the idea of it. I think he does too.
He has such a talent, such a beautiful voice. These voices don't come along just like that. I mean, once in a decade you get a voice like that.
I think George Michael's legacy will be that in 50 and 100 years' time, people will still be listening to Careless Whisper in the way that we're already still listening to Sitting on the Dock of the Bay or Love Me Tender or whatever. These songs will be going around forever.
People who are loyal to George Michael are people who have continued to buy his records from the age of 14 to the age of 45, and I think that's unique in pop history.
Straight or gay, songwriting star or stoner, George Michael has changed, but the power of his music and his personal popularity have never faltered.
There's the classic ugly duckling story here. He started out an awkward young man who didn't look like he was ever going to turn into any kind of heartthrob. He went through being a heartthrob, then emerged to be a musician of great talent and skill. And today he's a swan, a bit of a gay swan, but he's a swan.